Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is the latest episode of Expert Perspectives, where I'm pleased to be joined by an old friend who is Stuart Roberts, and tell you a little bit more about what Stuart does in a minute. But the first time we met, he was actually head of trade financing for Citibank, and he then actually moved on to be head of all of trade financing for JP Morgan. So he has a lot of experience in very senior positions in big banks doing this. But actually, the first time we met was when he was still with Citi, and I'd asked Citi for some help with doing inventory financing. And we met in Singapore, had a very nice lunch, and he said, forget about it, it's much too complicated. His job is now doing inventory financing, and that is the topic for this meeting. So clearly one of the things in there is that a lot has changed, including who Stuart now works for. But with that, I'll hand over to Stuart to explain both his perspective and to tell us something about Procura.
Thank you, Damian. So taking aside any kind of personality defects where you may think I'm a bit of a masochist, I obviously, as Damian mentioned, worked at Citi for a very long time, and I was at JP Morgan for over 5 years as their head of trade finance. But in all that time, even though I always thought it was incredibly challenging and difficult, I always thought that at some point, the holy grail of working capital would be to be able to take inventory off balance sheet for large corporates, because de facto, once you have the inventory, the receivables and the payables necessarily follow. So it was always something of a holy grail as opposed to a bifurcated view in terms of supply chain finance or receivables finance. But as Damian mentioned, it has been a long, hard road for those involved in inventory finance. And I will say now that I'm not in a bank, I no longer call it inventory finance. Clearly for the banks, it is a financing. But for us at Procura, it is an inventory management service that we provide to our clients. What does that mean? Procura was formed in 2018 as a management buyout from a German asset manager that specialized in financing tangible assets. And one of those tangible assets that it looked at was inventory. Once that company was bought by a public-owned entity, they no longer wanted the inventory because it was very debt-heavy. They spun off the entity, and that entity became Procura in 2018. We have 6 partners, including myself, based in New York, London, Frankfurt, and we're a team of about 16 people with all of our operations and technology based in Frankfurt. So that's basically Procura. What we do is we buy and sell inventory on behalf of our customers, suppliers, and customers. So we act either as a super supplier or a super distributor for our core clients. More often than not, we are introduced to our core clients through our banking relationships, which often puts us directly face-to-face in a lot of our first conversations with the Treasury teams, as opposed to necessarily supply chain teams. But that isn't necessarily an issue because we find that treasurers fully understand kind of the impact of working capital, and they understand the value of something like this if it can be attained. And then clearly what they need to do is work within their organizations to kind of socialize the idea.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Stuart,
yeah,
but
no,
are you seeing things changing? Because a phrase that stuck in my mind is we've moved from inventory being just in time to just in case, which means that it's become a much bigger issue.
Yeah, I think 2 things. Number one, COVID, the challenges in sourcing that COVID exposed for a lot of both companies as well as industries and clearly nation states was something of an eye-opener. Additionally, at the same time as COVID, you also had Russia invade Ukraine, which highlighted again sanctions, geopolitical risk, which has only elevated over the last few years. And then lastly, during COVID, you clearly had quantitative easing. And then by 2022, that turned into quantitative tapering. And so again, working capital, a reduction in the money supply, and the ability for banks to be able to commit as much lending as they were able to do during quantitative easing has forced people to start looking more aggressively at working capital within the corporate space. So those high-level macros played into then a change in the way supply chains and the way companies sourced, right? It used to be all about efficiency, lowest cost, and no one really cared too much about elongated and complex geographical supply chains. That's now changed into contingency. People want to know, if this supply chain breaks, what is my fallback position? What is my contingent sourcing or customer area? And that has only been exacerbated by tariffs, particularly, instigated out of the US, but the change in the tariff regimes globally has only kind of exacerbated what was a movement post-COVID away from elongated, efficient supply chains into shorter, nearshoring, contingent supply chains with multiple sourcing and multiple customer sites.
And lots of buffer. Now,
Yeah.
I think you mentioned that one of the thing that Procura does is it's not just financing, but that's a part, but it's also helping people manage. Now, clearly, most treasurers are not responsible for physically managing inventory.
Right.
So how do you kind of get the procurement or the supply chain guys on board?
I think, where we've seen the best success is where companies and industries are undergoing significant change, where that's causing changes to their business model and or stresses to their financial position, which forces treasurers, supply chain people, procurement, under the umbrella of the CFO, to come together to try to figure out how to solve for these problems. Clearly, an example of that, and where we've had a lot of success, is in the area of data centers. The explosion of data centers and the drive towards both public and private cloud, and then you mix in AI. If you look at GPUs for AI GPUs from NVIDIA, 2 years ago, a GPU 200 was $1 million. GPU 300 is now $4 million. So everybody wants the latest, and so that is clearly creating huge amounts of financial stress in the race to get to market share and capitalize on that future growth. Similarly, we see the same thing in automobiles, with cars as a platform, and that is causing significant stress on sourcing as they try to chase the same parts that tech companies and everybody else are chasing. So where you see the transformational changes occurring, it forces the treasurer into having to respond to those transformational changes. Then what we look for is that treasurer to be able to work and find the right people within the organization and say, hey, we all understand we have these challenges, but here's a solution that may help. That is, effectively what we do is once we're able to get to grips with the underlying commercial problem, not necessarily the financial problem, the underlying commercial problem, that's when we can really add value.
Okay,
so go ahead.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt again, but for me, where the two come together is that if you want to get inventory financing off the balance sheet, then you need to sell the inventory, which of course, can be a big river to cross.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think, again, Procura's mantra is absolutely low touch. And we have some fantastic partners who are former lawyers, partners in big law firms. And I think we've very cleverly used the concepts of agency and principal law, so that, yes, in principle, we own the inventory, we carry all of the economic risk of the inventory, but we reappoint as our agents the existing constituents within the supply chain to act on our behalf and to conduct the work. So while it may be sitting in our customer's warehouse or in our customer's supplier's warehouse, we have reappointed those constituents to be our agent and to manage and to secure in safekeeping that inventory. And obviously we pay them a commercial rate for doing so, but it's all on the basis of doing no harm, doing no damage to existing processes. So we will appoint.
Sorry, does this become more difficult if they're highly bespoke parts or components?
No, we actually like that more than general kind of commodities, because in a general commodity sense, then we have to go out and buy a hedge, and it becomes a little more challenging. With bespoke parts, we have the absolute right to sell those bespoke parts to anyone we may choose. Clearly, our intent is that our customer will buy those parts. And what we do is we make those parts available for them to appropriate at will. And as they appropriate them, they notify us on a weekly, monthly basis, whatever it may be, and that ultimately will create an invoice from us. But the fact that we make it available, and we make it available on a rolling basis based upon their forecasted demand and their purchase orders, makes it, from an accounting perspective, a contingent obligation, which is neither probable nor estimable at the time when they make those forecast demands and those purchase orders, because their expectation is they will consume that inventory within that time period.
You obviously spend more time than is healthy talking to accountants.
Yeah, we do.
I'm afraid we've run out of time. So I personally found that very enlightening, and I think it goes a long way towards moving. You've clearly moved the ball on this. If anybody wants to learn more, obviously they can get in touch with you via us and via the details we'll put down here. But in the meantime, thank you.
Damian, yeah, no, thank you very much. And I would just say to all the treasurers again, be the influencer rather than necessarily leading the conversations with accountants. But if you can influence the rest of the organization to come to the table, then it actually is a lot easier than I originally thought in 2018, 2017. So thank you.
Thank you.